Can you first of all hear me? Great. Thank you for the introduction. I get a lot of introductions, and some of them I particularly enjoy. You heard that I used to work in libraries when I had a proper job. I was introduced once by a head teacher, a principal, before I was going to speak to the children at his school. And he said, "Sometimes you wonder why people have the jobs they do." And I thought, oh dear, what's going to come next, you know? But at the end of it, he said, "So you see, that's why Mr. Williams is the children's librarian." So maybe something useful had happened in between. I also enjoyed the introduction. "This is Mr. Williams, the librarian who has agreed to come and talk to us." All the others have said, "Oh, no, no." So I was the one who gave in at the end. It's lovely to see you all here. And my mention of that background reminds me to say to you that storytellers come from any background. Some storytellers come from being teachers, some from being actors, in my case from being a librarian, often just being human, because we all tell stories. And you will hear a variety of styles, I'm sure, through this conference. I always think of Jan as a proper storyteller, where I tell stories. But you'll hear different kinds of stories. And what I'm planning to do today is this. We're going to have a little introduction first. I do hope you can read this. It looked brighter when I made it. Then I'm going to tell you 3 very short folk stories. And then I'm going to ask you to practice retelling those stories in your groups. I think a workshop needs something happening. Sometimes workshops are just another lecture. This workshop has you doing something. And then we can have some feedback, some questions. And I should also say to you now, before I forget, that I have sent several handouts about storytelling. And I've sent them to Ted, and they will put them up on their website. They may have put them up already. So don't feel that you have to write down everything today. Just relax and enjoy yourself, because you can look at those later on. Now, there are lots of material that you can use to tell stories. And I used quite a range of material. I use picture books, because the UK is particularly strong on publishing attractive picture books. And sometimes I will use those with young children and also with older children, because there are picture books with a very wide age range. I think it's also important if parents are invited to sit in on a session, because I could do a very polished story, maybe not quite as good as Jan, but I could do a polished story, and parents would say, "Well, I couldn't do that." But if I show that you can bring the same tips and hints to a printed story, they might have the courage to have a go. The second thing is traditional stories, and we're going to look at those today, folk tales, and it also, of course, includes myths, legends, fairy tales, sagas, fables. There are many different kinds of traditional story. I will also use riddles. Now, you might think this is a tricky thing for teaching English, because riddles sometimes require knowledge of the language. Sometimes they will use word play. But there are riddles that don't, and I will explain some of those tomorrow in the plenary. Jokes, personal anecdotes, you know, something that happened to you, maybe a family story that you remember. All of these are examples of stories. Poetry as well, and also, as you'll see tomorrow, I use extracts, little tasters of older fiction for children. And when I'm working with teenagers, I will also sometimes use scary or yucky urban legends. So there's a whole variety available. What we're going to do today, though, is concentrate on folk tales. And these are the 3 folk tales that I'm going to tell to you. The first one is called "Why Dog Lives with Man." Man means mankind, all of us. The second one is called Stone Soup, you may know it. And the third one is called The Peddler of Swaffham. All stories are the world's stories. I grew up thinking that Cinderella was somehow our story, but there are nearly 200 versions of Cinderella around the world. Most of them don't have the glass slipper. Many of them are really interesting in the way they change the story. And the world is where stories come from. The Peddler of Swaffham is a story which is known in the UK, in an area called Norfolk on the east coast. And they think it's their story. They've got a statue in the middle of the village of the peddler and his dog. But you can find a very similar story in the Arabian Nights, in the 1001 Nights. Who knows whether it came from there to here or here to there. Stories travel, and they travel because people travel, and they take stories in their heads. So I'm going to tell them to you, and then I'll give you a few hints and tips about telling, and then we'll hand it over to you to try telling those stories in your groups. The first one is perhaps more appropriate for primary schools, but like any story, and you heard Jan say this, once upon a time, and there are no levels that are really appropriate. So any of these stories I think you could use with any ages, but I use Why Dog Lives with Man with younger children. It's a story that I borrowed, because storytellers borrow from each other, from a UK storyteller called Taffy Thomas. And it's his shortened version of a story which is known in quite a few countries. There is a dog. There is a hare, which is like a rabbit, but a bit bigger. There is a wolf. Now, you've had howling practice already, haven't you? There is a bear, again. And there is a man with a gun. So watch out for them. A long time ago, Dog was lonely. So Dog went to see Hare, and Dog said, hey, Hare, you and me, we could be friends. And Hare said, okay, we'll give it a go, So all day long they hunted together, looking for food. And all night long they lay down together, side by side. But in the middle of the night, Dog woke up and he howled. Oh! Hey, said Hare, don't do that. Because if you do, you might wake up Wolf and he'll come and get us both. Oh, thought Dog. Well, if Hare is frightened of Wolf, maybe Wolf is the strongest one. So the next day, Dog went to see Wolf. And Dog said, hey, Wolf, you and me, we could be friends. And Wolf said, okay, we'll give it a go. So, can you help me with your hands? All day long they hunted together. Well done. All night long they lay down together, side by side. But in the middle of the night, Dog woke up. Are you ready? And he howled. Very polite. Hey, said Wolf, don't do that. Because if you do, you might wake up Bear. And he'll come and get us both. Oh, well, if Wolf is scared of Bear, maybe Bear is the strongest one. So the next day, Dog went to see Bear. And Dog said, hey, Bear, you and me, you and me. I don't know why I do that, I just do. You and me, we could be friends. Okay, said Bear. We'll give it a go. So, are you ready with your hands? All day long they hunted together. All night long they lay down together, side by side. But in the middle of the night, Dog woke up and he howled. Getting louder? Hey, said Bear. Don't do that. Welsh Bear, I think. Don't do that, because if you do, you might wake up Man, and he'll come and get us both. Ah, thought Dog. Well, if bear is frightened of man, maybe man's the strongest one. So the next day, dog went to see man. And dog said, hey man, you and me, you and me. We could be friends. Sometimes you'll scare away hares and wolves and bears and maybe robbers, burglars. Yes, you do that sometime. And if you do, I'll give you some food and you can stay with me. And that is how dog came to live with man. Now, it's a very short story. It's very repetitive, which means it's easy to remember, I hope. We all remember in different ways, don't we? Some of us are visual, some of us are auditory, some of us are kinesthetic learners. If you remember with words, you need to get the words down to the bare bones, as storytellers call the story. You will hear storytellers sometimes saying, I'm bare-boning that story, getting it down to the very essentials. If you hold up one hand, I will show you how you can remember it. Go on, have a go. Hold up one hand. Your thumb is the dog, okay? So dog goes to see, who was first? Hare, and then wolf, and each time, hunt, sleep, howl, and then in the end, man says, good idea. So those in your hand and in your head are the bare bones of that story already. People say to me, how do you remember all those stories? That one is the easiest one I know to remember. You will be able to try that story out tonight to an unsuspecting wife, husband, partner, child. Little do they know what is coming. Okay, the second one is a very familiar story, particularly in countries like Eastern Europe. It's called variously stone soup, nail soup. There are different titles for it, and there are different ways of telling it. Here is my way. You will first of all have to use your imagination, because this is a young lad, all right, a young boy. Sorry. A young lad was walking down the road. He was poor, he was hungry, his clothes were ragged, and he hadn't had anything to eat for 2 days. He was really hungry. And the boy thought, how can I get some food? And then he had an idea. Bing! Light bulb. And he bent down and he picked up a stone that he found on the roadside. And he went down the little road into a village with some little houses. And he knocked on the door of the first house. And from that house came a little old woman like this. She's probably coming rickety-tickety. And she said, yes, what is it? And the boy said, have you got any food you could give me? No, that's the woman, no. She's very mean, is this woman. She has a lot of food, but she doesn't want to share it. No. Oh, says the boy, because I was rather hoping I could show you my magic soup stone. What do you mean, magic soup stone? Said the lady. No, this is a magic stone, said the boy. Look, with this stone, you can make the most amazing soup. Really? Said the old lady. Are you sure? Yes, said the boy. Look, if I could come in, maybe I could show you. Yeah, all right then, said the woman. She opened the door. She got a big cooking pot, and the boy put the stone in the cooking pot. They poured in some water, and he started to stir it over the heat, over the fire. And then the boy said, this is going to be a wonderful soup. I can almost smell it already. Do you know, sometimes when I make this soup, I put in some carrots to give it a bit of colour. If you don't have any, it doesn't matter. Oh, wait a minute, said the old lady. I might have some carrots. She goes to her cupboard. There are lots of carrots there. She brings 2. The boy chops them up, puts them in the pot, and he keeps stirring. Oh, this is going to be a wonderful soup. Sometimes, he said, when I make this soup, I put potatoes in because they help to make the soup thicker. It's a shame that you haven't got any, but never mind. Oh, wait a minute, said the old lady. I might have some potatoes. And she brings some potatoes. And the boy keeps stirring. Which vegetable shall we get him to ask her for next? Give me a vegetable. Celery, did someone say? Or onions? Sometimes, said the boy, when I make this soup, just to give it an extra bite, a bit of extra taste, I put in some onions. It's such a pity that you don't have any onions. But never mind. Oh, wait a minute, I might have some onions. teacher brings some onions. And you can see how this can go. You can get vocabulary from your students. They can suggest all sorts of different things. You need to remember them, add them to the pot, so that, as Jan was saying, they feel praised, they feel that their idea is being used. They put a bit of salt, a bit of pepper in the end. The woman gets some big hunks of bread. They pour the soup out, and they both have some soup. "Oh," said the old lady, "this is wonderful soup. This is amazing. Just to think that soup is made just from a stone. That's a magic stone, all right." "Well," said the boy, "I'll tell you what I can do." It's a bit hot. Sorry. "I'll tell you what I will do. You've been so good to me, letting me share this soup. You can have my magic soup stone." "Oh, really?" said the old lady. "Thank you so much. Now I can have soup whenever I want." "That's all right," said the boy. And off he went on his way. And when he got a bit hungrier in a couple of days, and he came down the road to another village, he bent down and picked up another stone. So that's the second story. And the third story has two rather challenging words, I suppose. Peddler is an old-fashioned word. Sometimes when I ask children in the UK what peddler means, they say, "Is it someone on a bike?" Because they think it's someone peddling a bicycle. But like all folk stories, they get changed as they are passed around. And a peddler is somebody who sells small items. He brings the items. He goes from door to door selling, in this case, in my version, maybe scissors, knives, buttons, ribbons, things like that. But they could be any other small items. That's what it means. And Swaffham, that's how you say it, Swaffham, is the name of a village in this version in Norfolk in the UK. There was a peddler. He was very poor. He lived in a tumble-down old house. There was a hole in the roof where the rain dropped in. There was a hole in the window where the wind blew through. There was even a hole in the bottom of the door where mice ran in and out. That rule of three, you'll find it in folk tales. The peddler didn't have much. He had a little square garden in the back with one apple tree. And he had a dog, which he took around with him on a piece of string. And one night, the peddler had a dream. And in his dream, he heard a voice. And the voice said, "Go to London. Go to London Bridge, and you'll see what you will see." Thought the peddler, this is strange. But off he went the next day around the villages, selling those scissors, knives, buttons, ribbons. And when he got back home and went to sleep, that night he had the same dream. And in the dream, the voice said once again, "Go to London. Go to London Bridge, and you will hear what you will hear." Thought the boy. This is very odd, the same dream 2 nights. But off he went around the villages, selling those knives, scissors, and so on. The 3rd night, he had the same dream. The 4th, the 5th, he had the same dream for a whole week. Well, thought the peddler, maybe this means something. Maybe someone up there is trying to tell me something. Maybe I should go to London. And in the end, that's what he did. And in those days, no railways, no motorways. He had to walk. It took him several days. He used to rest underneath hedges if it rained. He would beg for some scraps of food. But in the end, he got to London. And in those days, London Bridge had lots of arches. And on the top, there were lots of shops, higgledy-piggledy, muddled up across the bridge. And the peddler sat at one end of the bridge, and he waited. And he waited. And waited. And nothing happened. And he found somewhere to sleep around the back of an inn, a hotel, and they were throwing out some bits of food, so that kept him going. And the next day, there he was in the bridge. And the 3rd day and the 4th, but nothing happened. And after a week had gone by, the peddler thought, "Oh, I've been a fool, haven't I, coming all this way for nothing? I better go home again." And he got up to his feet and he stretched, and he was just about to start his long trip home when one of the shopkeepers came out of a shop near to where he had been sitting. And the shopkeeper said, "Excuse me, I've seen you there every day this week. What are you doing? Are you waiting for something? What's happening?" And the peddler said, "Oh, well, You'll think I'm a fool, but I heard this voice in my dream, and it said, go to London, and then I heard it again, and I thought I would come and see, what it meant. And the shopkeeper started laughing. Oh, I said, you don't want to listen to dreams? No, dreams are crazy stuff. They're all mixed up. Take me, for example. The other night, I had this dream. Oh, dear, it was strange. I was in a little village, I don't know, Swaffham or somewhere it was called, and I lived in this house. There was a hole in the roof and in the window, and in my dream, I was digging under the tree in the back garden, and my shovel hit something, and there was a box of gold coins. I mean, how stupid is that? The peddler was halfway across the bridge. He was walking, running. He got back in half the time, and when he got home, he found a spade, and he went out into that garden, and he dug, and after a while, his spade hit something hard. He cleared the earth around it. He found a box. He knocked the lock of the box, opened it up, and the box was full of gold coins. Now, that's a story, again, that you could tell, I think, to all ages. And I don't want to delay much further because I want to give you some time. But are you going to do something? What you might like to do in your groups is, first of all, introduce the story. You can do this in a variety of ways. You might like to say, do you ever have dreams? This is rehearsing what you would do with your students. Have you ever had a crazy dream, that sort of thing. And that will lead you into the story. Sometimes you might explain some words, particularly teaching another language. You might want to talk, as I did, about the peddler. You might want to list the animals in the first story. Sometimes I use a flip chart, and I put the words up so that has been dealt with, and we can relax and enjoy the story. Take time, don't rush, and enjoy the pauses. Use your voice. There are 3 pairs of opposites that your voice can do. I wonder if you can guess. Opposites, black and white, hot and cold. I'm thinking of 3 pairs of opposites that your voice can do. Can you guess? Anybody give me a pair of opposites that your voice can do? Yes. Yes, high and low. Yeah, fine. Most of us can make our voice go a little bit higher if it's a fairy or a queen, maybe. And many of us, maybe some more than others, can make our voice go very low. Have a practice at home. Your wife or husband will think you've gone crazy, but hey, practice somewhere quiet. See how low and how high you can get. That's one pair of opposites. Can you think of another? Oh, sorry? Thick and thin. I'm not sure about how that will work with your voice. What were you saying? Fast and slow certainly would. Yes, that's a great one, isn't it? Sometimes your voice might be quite fast when I tell the story of Vasilissa, the Russian princess, and she's escaping from Baba Yaga, the witch who has a big nose and a big chin, and flies across the sky in her pestle and mortar, the one that you grind spices with. That's an exciting story, and my voice might be going quite quickly, but sometimes it will slow right down and pause. What about the last pair? We've had fast and slow, high and low. Anyone else? Sorry? Hot and cold? It's all right, I can hear. I'll repeat so that the others can hear. Yep. Sad, happy. That's certainly your mood, isn't it? What about you? Rough and smooth. Yep. That's what I'm working towards. Thank you for guiding me towards it. Sometimes your voice might be quite quiet if it is a scary story. That's why it's important to breathe carefully. If I was whispering to you there, it would be like this. Have you noticed what's happening? I don't know if you can see who's come in the door. Nobody has. But I could whisper to the back of the hall if I'm using my breath properly. Don't look now. But at the back of the hall, an elephant has just come into the room. It's about using your breath. And you might use a difference between loud and soft. I do a story for older children about a tailor, a man who makes clothes. He's making a pair of trousers in a church in the middle of the night for a bet, because this church, this ruined church, is supposed to be haunted. And at one point, this great big monster appears from a gravestone. And in that point of the story, the monster gives a great big roar like that. And you've got that difference between quiet and soft. Okay. Pronounce words clearly, particularly with English, if they're learning another language, making eye contact, using gestures. I'm going to leave you 3 key messages before you start your groups. One book on storytelling, I remember vividly, said this: it is impossible to go over the top. You know the phrase, over the top. And sometimes when people are acting in a play, they are clearly going over the top. But with storytelling, and particularly with young people, exaggerate. Make it larger than life. Give it a sense of drama. The second thing is, leave your inhibitions at the classroom door. Sometimes I talk to people about storytelling and they're not keen to do it because maybe they like to be in command of the class and so on. But the students will appreciate it if you relax, if you join in with those choruses as well. Rediscover the child inside you. I, as you can see, am 120 years old. But scary the way some of you are nodding because you're obviously... But inside there is a 100-year-old and a 70-year-old and a 50-year-old and a 20-year-old and probably a 5 or 6-year-old still. I think that's a good idea with stories. And have fun. Right. So we're going to go into groups. A quick introduction. Decide who's going to go first. I think there should be time for certainly 2 or 3 to have a go telling the story. Try one of the stories you've just heard. If you do want to try another story, it must be short. Jan's stories are great. Her stories today were about 15 minutes, but we don't really have time to do lots of 15-minute stories, of course. But if you can think of a 4 or 5-minute story, then that's fine. But I'd like you to try some of the stories you've heard. The listeners have a role to play too, so if you're the one trying to tell the story, the others need to be attentive. They can't, get their phones out and look at the Facebook pages. And if there are choruses and actions, you can get them to join in. And then at the end, I hope the others will give you some friendly feedback. I don't think you can read that, but just in case you panic, there is a rough summary of how each story goes. So what I'd like you to do is to maybe turn around, make semicircles, or maybe turn back, kneel on your chair to the people behind, whichever way you want. Get into groups of 4 or 5 and have a go. Okay? I'm going to leave you to sort yourselves out, but if not, this lady will come around and force you into groups in a very pleasant way.
I just wanted to say that when you guys came, I didn't take the tickets because there's lots of people here. So now when you guys are in the group, I'm just going to come around and take the tickets.
Okay, get yourselves into little groups and have a practice telling those stories. Off we go. Okay. Thank you very much for practicing stories, and I hope it's been a good experience. What I'd like to do, well, we can do 2 things. First of all, I would really like to hear from you about whether you found it difficult, whether you found it easy, any questions it has brought about in your mind about telling stories. And if not, then there are a couple more slides where we can look at some more hints and tips for you. But let's just talk about this session that you've just had. Any comments from any of the groups? Put your hand up if there was anything that you want to mention that came out of your group. Gentleman in the middle.
Just by I hate hearing my voice.
So do I.
Just by improvising, I found that it's difficult to... I'm a native English speaker, so it's very natural for me to kind of improvise and just use any type of sentence structure or grammar that just comes to my mind, and trying to keep it sort of formulaic where you're using the same phrases in each phase of the story is a bit difficult. And I wondered how do you keep that form so that the children can follow it and
I suppose part of that bare bones of the story that I mentioned, part of it is mental signposts for what comes next. I mean, those, if you like, are the bare bones of those stories. Sometimes I will remember key phrases because you need those phrases to make the story work. But I will tell the story in a slightly different way every time, and that doesn't really matter. I think it's quite good if you tell stories again to a class. I will mention this tomorrow. If you tell the story once, it's a good idea to tell it maybe at the other side. You know, if you tell it once at the beginning of the lesson, tell it again before the lesson finishes, and then maybe tell it the next day, or maybe once more the next week, because that repetition will help get it into the students' heads. But if you use a slightly different word, I don't think that's a bad thing. You will use different words for that. You will make the story your own. It may be about a different animal. I've just given you some examples of animals here. There is a version of that story from Somalia where the dog gets to the village and it's going to stay with one of the villagers, and it sees the man getting a really good telling off from his wife. So the dog says, I'm going to stay with her. So there are variations all around the world. But so I don't think it's critical that it's exactly the same every time. But if you've got that basic structure, and you heard in that first story, for example, okay, we'll give it a go, and that phrase probably has to be there, and then that leads you into those things. It leads you into the hunting and sleeping and so on. It's a very easy story to get in your head. Any other comments? Sorry if that's not a whole answer, but it's a part of an answer. Oh, we have a comment at the front here because no one else has got their hand up.
Actually, I'm sorry. I was going to say something. But you kind of already talked about it. What we talked about in our group is, like, for example, the Peddler of Swaffham.
Yep.
You know, the Smitji of Antalya, or, you know, localizing it, or
yes,
even the stone soup, using objects in the classroom. But you kind of already talked about that.
Yeah, I mean, that happens to folk tales and has happened to folk tales for generations. When they are passed down from mouth to ear, mouth to ear, mouth to ear, sometimes bits are misunderstood, sometimes bits are forgotten, sometimes new bits are added, sometimes a story, or often a story, is made more appropriate for the country that it has come to. So you might well use Turkish names, you might use local animals, and so on. That's fine. These are not copyrighted, these are available for everyone. Yes?
We kids, some kids like to draw the picture of the book.
Yeah.
And when they tell the story, even if it doesn't have pictures, you can think it up in your mind, like a picture in your mind.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, both I think are good. You heard me say at the beginning that, I mean, this is one of my favorite picture books. I don't have time to tell it, but it's about a giant. In any case, I can't tell picture books easily to a big audience, and I certainly can't tell one tomorrow morning, because I will be doing this all the time, and it will be like being at Wimbledon trying to watch the tennis. For a picture book, you need shorter lines, and you need everybody to be able to see. I think both have got their advantages. Some storytellers feel that proper storytelling is always from memory, and this they would call story reading, and they view it as a lesser thing. I think both offer things, and certainly pictures give a lovely idea of that artist's version of the story. So if you do use books, you need a variety to show that that story, or stories generally, can be illustrated in all sorts of ways, including the children like yourself, illustrating it afterwards, maybe. Have we got any other questions? Or have you all been... Yes. They do, yes. Yep. That's true, yes, as long as they give you something back. Well, that's very true. I mean, the thing about pictures is we have both, both from my country and from yours, some wonderful illustrated books. But remember, of course, that they are only one person's version of that story. When a director, when Steven Spielberg, sometimes people will say, Steven Spielberg is a great storyteller. And what they, yes, he is, but through the medium of film. and what you're seeing very often is his version of the event. If I tell you those stories, and if I passed a piece of paper around afterwards and said, draw me the peddler of Swaffham, all of you would do something different, because something different has happened in each head. And both, I think, are valuable. Particularly, stories from memory demonstrate to older students the ability to hold an audience just with words. We have a generation which is growing up, and they just make, like me today, PowerPoints, and they just talk about the bullet points, and that is presentations to them. But the reason I got rid of the text when I was telling is because I needed your attention, and I needed to demonstrate that doing a presentation involves engaging with the audience. And what you will do is maybe give them something funny, and then they're with you for a few minutes, and then you'll reward them with something else, and you need to work the audience. Anything else? Yeah.
I mean, the first story and the second story, so you can involve the students, for example, howling and stuff. But some stories are not like this. I mean, the last one, how can we involve the students in these stories that are not as kinesthetic? They can't, involve in the story. How can we do that? Some stories are not active.
I suppose, as a rule of thumb, the younger the children, the more participation. It is harder with an adult audience to get them participating, because as adults we are more embarrassed, perhaps. But there is also a value in learning to listen and celebrating the art of just listening. A teacher said to me in a school the other day, we have had some school inspectors around, and they didn't like the idea of storytelling because it was not interactive enough. And I said to her, but even storytelling is interactive, and also, isn't it a good thing sometimes to extend children's concentration span, even if there is no obvious interaction? You could put, as Jan did with the peddler of Swaffham, you could say, and so the peddler said to the, and you could fill in old woman, you know, and you notice there was a little bit of interaction with the suggesting of the vegetables. Not every story will be interactive throughout, but there'll usually be some occasion for making it interactive. And storytelling is interactive even if you don't know it's happening, because most storytellers, and I'm no exception, will have, do you know that phrase, a signature dish that chefs use? A chef at a restaurant might have a signature dish, which is their favorite dish that they always do. And I suppose it's like that with me when I'm storytelling, because I have a signature story. I probably will use Why Dog Lives with Man with the primary school first, and then I'll be listening to the reaction. And if the reaction is good, then my mind will be thinking, well, in that case I could do that one. But if the reaction is not so good, I'll be thinking, so I will do that one. So you are influencing the stories even without knowing it. Just while you think of some more questions, we've actually gone past our time, so I will put them just in front of you. I think a whiteboard or a flip chart is quite a useful thing, because you can write up words, you can do little drawings and so on. I don't mind a little use of the home language, as Jan was saying. You know, if you are telling a story and there's not quite the understanding, it's good to keep the momentum of the story by helping it to explain it. We've talked about retelling. Here are some things that you can do just to get yourself more confident about telling stories. You can read them without me having to say, I think, and understand what they mean. Comfort blanket at the bottom means maybe if you've got a new story, you might just like to have the print on your knee in case you get lost. But as soon as you feel you've achieved it, then the print can go. Lots of things to say on how to hold children's interest, because sometimes children will wander. Some of that to do is with setting up the story, the storytelling session. If they are all looking at a window and there are things happening outside, or if they're all looking at a door where people keep coming in, that sort of thing is important at the beginning. Varying the pace, having a story and then maybe a poem, and then a story and then maybe a riddle. Interruptions, all I would say to you is not to get cross with the children, because nothing destroys the atmosphere like saying, I'm not going to continue until you behave yourselves. you'll be able to, I think, firmly but carefully, and it might just mean you walking towards someone. What do you think happened? And you've got their attention again. You have the advantage that I don't because you know the children's names. So if they are listening, you can say, do you understand, Jason? And Jason back there is suddenly panicking because he heard his name. And the same with you have that ability. Sometimes children just want attention. And if they are disruptive, I will sometimes say, look, you come to the front. And if it's a picture book, I will say, you be my page turner. And sometimes, faced with the rest of the audience, they got a lot quieter. There are so many things you can do after stories. There are just a few of them. And all of them, I think you can imagine. The last one means if you're getting children into reading, have some thought about where they will go. If you like that story about the peddler swaffham, why don't you try these and have a little reading journey on hand for them. Thank you for your attention. I'm sorry we've overrun slightly, but I hope it's been useful for you to have a go for yourselves. I'll be around the rest of, some of today, I think, and I'll certainly be back tomorrow because I'll be doing a big session with flashing lights and things. But thank you, and thank you yourselves.